Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Scott Stedman podcast. Today is a wonderful day, and it's always a wonderful day when my co-host is joining me on this episode. So, Micah, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm good. You build me up just to tear me down. No, I'm just kidding.
Never going to give you up, never going to tear you down.
I don't think it would be a podcast if you didn't break into some sort of lyric.
Yeah, especially the last episode where I'm singing random songs.
Yes, and we talked about what a troubadour is, and I actually listened to that episode today or yesterday, and we were talking about how, and you started, I think it was the conference that you were at last weekend, and then you were talking about how the singing goes along, and
yeah,
I think
I started singing the Witcher theme song.
Yes, and I think
That's
you'd be
the
perfect.
point.
I think you'd be perfect at that. Perfect at that role. But
well, if everybody caught my streaming channel that I game, there's a part in the game that I'm playing Okami, and there's this part where you could feed animals, and there's like this moment where the camera pans in a whole slowly in a 360 circle while you as your character is sitting there watching this animal eat food that you put out before them. So I started doing haikus. And I just started making random haikus up, and it was so funny. So you can catch it at twitch.tv/gamesneverfinished. Just check on the episode today and listen to my wonderful haikus.
There's a cheap plug there for you.
Cheap plug. There you go. I need a sound effect. like those shock jocks. Hey, push a button and here's a sound effect. But anyway, so before we dive into everything, I actually got a comment from our last episode.
Last week's episode?
Last week's episode about NDAs and contracts and cease and desist.
I think this should be our new segment because I always forget about the weirdest thing that's ever happened to me.
No, but well, we could skip that segment for today. That's fine
with
me.
I could think about one, but this could be a new segment for us.
Yeah, if people, again, if you want, feel free, good, bad, or ugly, comment on our episode and we will share it. But no, there is a pastor who happened to stumble upon the podcast, was listening to it, and actually wrote to me and said, hey, I actually went back. He said he served at this church for many, many years. And when this pastor resigned, he had to sign an NDA. And he did it because they're offering like a pretty big, kind of severance package.
Yeah.
And he actually went back and he still had the letter. So he actually went back and read it. And as he was reading through the letter, he realized that, there was no plan or anything in that letter that had to do with reconciliation. And even said that, some of the relationships that he's had at that church when everything went down are still kind of severed because of none of those relationships being restored or being reconciled. And basically thanked you and me for doing a good job and talking about this topic. So that was the gist of the message I got. So
I think we also had a comment on our Matt Chandler episode, didn't we?
Yeah, we did.
You can go to YouTube. On your YouTube page.
Go to YouTube and find that, because some of that stuff.
But you had no idea who it was. Like it was a
no,
weird
I have no idea. But
yeah.
No, but there was comments on the Matt Chandler one. There was some stuff, people who were kind of, I don't know if they had more inside information, but they were commenting on it. And one particular person was commenting about, I don't understand how these pastors who have these smoking hot wives can go in and cheat. And even though we don't really know, like right now, cheating's not the main reason, at least the official statement that was given why Matt Chandler took a leave of absence and that his wife knew about it. But yeah, there is definitely some comments there that, again, you'll have to go find the YouTube episode of that. I think I don't even know what episode number that is, but just look up Scott Stedman podcast, Matt Chandler and Scandal, and you should be able to find the video, and you can read all the wonderful comments on there. But yeah, we've been getting more comments, so I'm excited about that.
Wonder if it has anything to do with me.
Those comments about Matt Chandler?
No, just the traction we're getting.
I don't know, man. Or
I
maybe it's
doubt
because
it.
I'm more consistent now. I usually would put a podcast every 3 months, and now I'm doing one every week. Consistency is key. So you have a
That's
weird
marketing
story for us,
101.
Micah.
Do what?
You have a weird story for us.
Um, Not so much weird as like uh I've been at this new church for about a month now, and we're trying to feel out like what the best format is for how we can do order of worship and get everybody incorporated, and what to include, what not to include, what things to let go, what things to incorporate, things to like enhance the service and make it better. And I don't know how you guys do it where you're at now, Scott, but like the last couple of weeks, we've tried various iterations of, you know, welcome, announcements, worship, announcements, back to worship, all these different, ways of doing service. And the last couple of weeks, we tried this whole like, we've had a pastor come up and do a brief welcome at the beginning of the service, and we do, some brief announcements, and then we kind of like set them loose to go say hi to one another, greet each other and handshake, hug, whatever, and then we just dive right into worship. And so like the last couple of weeks, like I got up on the platform yesterday to tune my guitar and get ready to go for worship while that opening segment was happening, but like there were like 14 people in the sanctuary, and I'm like, where is everybody? So the pastor who was doing the welcome and the scripture share, sharing scripture and some brief announcements and whatnot, come on in, welcome to church. We're so glad you're here. Shared some scripture, set them off to greet each other. And again, there was like 14 people in there. But Scott, as soon as worship started, as soon as we dove right into worship, like it was about halfway through the first song, and like the sanctuary was full. Like it just, and we talked about it this morning in our staff meeting, but it's like as soon as you start playing music, it's weird how the church is laid out. It's an older building, but like as soon as they hear worship going, they're out there, talking in the parking lot or talking in the lobby. And it's like, but as soon as they hear music, that's like their cue. So I think we're going to kind of change the way that we structure worship. And the pastor this morning was like, we can just get rid of the meet and greet time because that's all they're doing in the lobby anyway. So let's just do worship and teaching.
That is very true. That is very true.
I was like, well, you're the pastor, you make that call. So I just found it really strange that like you can do worship, like the order of worship a number of different ways. And it doesn't matter which order you do things. It's amazing to me that like church people can't be on time to church. I just don't get it. I've been doing this for 10 years, been going to church my whole life. You've been doing this your whole life. But like I told, our service starts at 10:40, and I was like, well, we should just change our service to 11 and actually start at 10:40, because then people would be on time, and my dad always used to joke and call it church of God time because, people were just notoriously late, but I think that's most churches.
Yeah, I think so too.
And that can be a podcast in itself. Talk about
why do people not show up to time to church? Oh, goodness.
Did you have any weird experiences over the weekend at your church, or?
No, well, I was at a wedding, and yeah, I mean,
I think every weekend since we've started our new role, Scott, you've had something different going on. You've had retreat.
I have like this weekend. This weekend is the only weekend I don't have anything going on. This weekend, but yeah. So
was the wedding good? Was that weird? Was it? Cool?
It was. So the wedding was weird, and
you were back
because I was back in Virginia.
Yeah.
So I was back in Virginia, and what made it weird wasn't necessarily anything odd that happened at the wedding. It was so untraditional. So just to kind of the people who I married were a couple who worked at the bakery that I worked at. They asked me to they tried to ask their pastor to marry them. The pastor wouldn't, because the pastor is very much like, well, I don't marry people who are living with each other before marriage, and has a firm stance on that. So they're going to ask me, but then they found out I was moving. So they're like, oh, so they kind of were briefly talking about it, like, oh yeah, we're going to ask you to marry us, but we found out that you're moving. I'm like, I can still come back. Like my marriage license is still good here in the state of Virginia. Plus, technically, I'm still a resident of Virginia until November because I still have my name on the lease at the apartment I have in Virginia. So I'm like, yeah, I'll do it. That'll be fine. So, but because of, for them trying to save money, they were doing it at a pub. And then so they invited people from the pub to show up. The groom and the bride were dressed up. So the groom was wearing a suit. The bride was wearing a wedding dress. So they wanted me to dress up. So here I am walking into this pub dressed in a suit. And I walk in and I was pretty impressed because they actually took down all the tables and they moved all their chairs and they actually set it up very nicely to the little tiny stage that they had. I usually do a charge for my wedding, and usually I have like a cross or something. But since I wasn't in a church and there definitely wasn't a cross going to be at a pub, I used my Bible and I kind of modified my charge a little bit towards the end of my ceremony. So it was funny because then they also told the owner, the people working the pub, no one's allowed to have any drinks until after the ceremony. So I went up there, I go, hey, can I have a glass of water? And they're like, yes, you're the only person who's allowed to have a drink. So they gave me a glass of water. I'm like, man, I should have asked for something a little bit stiffer. But we did this.
Did you sign an NDA, Scott?
No, I did not have to sign an NDA for getting a glass of water. But no, I went there and we did the ceremony. It went well, but what made it even weirder is that the pastor of their church who wouldn't marry them was actually there in attendance. So I got to do service, got to talk to him for a little bit, and we knew each other. So everything was cool. We just got to talk and catch up. And then there's some people from the bakery there. So we got to talk and catch up. And there's some other people there that I knew from various things that I was part of in that area of Virginia who were talking to me. There's some people who are asking me, literally they're asking me, hey, what church do you preach at? I'd like to come visit you, visit your church. And I'm like, well, I got news for you, pal. You have to drive to Ohio if you want to hear me speak. So I said, no, I resigned from my church here in Virginia a couple of years ago. So, but it was funny though, because there's a lot of people who came up to me and said, man, that was such a beautiful service. You did a good job. Everything you did was like my hopes and prayers for this couple. You just articulated very well in your sermon and your little homily and everything that you did for that service. So everybody was like really high on my performance of doing this wedding. So,
well,
it was really good, but I mean, it was probably I feel like there's only been one, actually, I think there's only been one wedding that I've conducted that has been in a church. I've done outdoor weddings. I've did one in a pub. I did one at the old Cleveland courthouse where they filmed the Avengers movie. So I was actually in there. Yeah. So I think there's only one wedding I've done that was actually in a church building.
Well, I want to say too, you said that the wedding that you did over the weekend was like one of the most least organized and least, the traditional weddings that you've ever done. And I want to say to that, for somebody who's done several weddings, I've done, several weddings. Those weddings tend to be the easiest because there's no stress involved.
Oh yeah.
There's like, it's not chaos. There's no bridezillas. There's no craziness of which family's trying to control what stuff. And, they don't go crazy if something doesn't happen and things aren't perfect. Like those throwaway weddings are like amazing because especially from the pastor's perspective. And we should do an episode on that. Like I did a wedding. One of my best friends at work, his name's Rich, and he did one of the Star Wars episodes with us on Nerd Talk. And he, and his wife, were going to get married in like October, November of 2020 when COVID was going on. But they called me the Monday before the country shut down or the world shut down. And they said, hey, we don't want to wait. If we eloped, will you do the ceremony this weekend? So we met them in a park outside, in March on a Saturday, and I performed their ceremony, and it was basically a throwaway. Like they dressed up and everything like they were going to get married in a church, and like it, they still did the normal ceremony, but it was very much last minute, so there was none of this like craziness in reference to super planning or over planning. And so it turned out to be a wonderful ceremony. And like it was freezing, it was spitting snow, it was in a park on a Saturday, but like after they sent us home and the world was shutting down, we managed to get it done. So, but there was no stress involved with that, so it was good. So I don't know if you agree with that. Like
No, I'd say I'd say that would, yeah, I would say. I mean, really, the only thing I had to worry about was when you do the whole, do you so and so take this so and so to be your wife or husband? Like, because a lot of times when I write it out, I just put the other person parties in parentheses, so I read back instead of me typing everything out. I just kind of do it, but then it's like, okay, now I have to remember to change him to her, and actually don't say, Micah, will you take Micah to be your bride or something? And then everyone gets a laugh because I misspoke. Like, then that was probably the only time I got nervous, but everything else was, I mean, it flew and it was good and it was wonderful. So, yeah. So, on to our topic today. One of the things we talked about in our last episode, you made a comment about, sometimes, the reason why we do these podcasts or talk about these things is because sometimes, being in ministry is a lonely job. And it kind of made me think of the idea of, should pastors have friends that are part of the church that they're pastoring at? And I feel like in my years of ministry, I have heard people talk about this, and I have gotten the gambit of answers. People say yes, people say no. So, Michael, what's your thoughts? Should ministers have developed at least maybe friendships or close friendships in the churches that they are a part of?
Well, yesterday when we were texting about what we were going to record about this week, I chose this topic, and I said it'd be great to talk about this, but also take it a step further with the connotation of like, what would it be like to have friends outside the context of the ministry that you serve? And it's a healthy conversation, because I think, back to your question, the first question, I think it's okay to have friends in the ministry you serve, because I mean, you have to do life with these people. I mean, they're part of the church that you serve, and we serve the church with the lay people and staff and other folks accordingly and alike to further the kingdom of God. And it can also be, it's one of two things, right? One, it can be a very, very fruitful thing. You can have lasting and lifelong friendships and relationships that, depending upon how long you stay in a ministry or a church or a vocation in the community in which you serve, it can be a lifelong thing, right? It could be a lifelong friendship. However, on the flip side of that, the second thing is that it can be a fine line, and it can be dangerous, right? Because what if things go sour? What if those friends throw you under the bus? What if they turn on you? What if things don't pan out the way that they're supposed to? What if you leave a ministry? I can share several stories and illustrations from being a child where we grew up in a pastor's home. And so like when so-and-so's family got mad and left the church, the couple not only took each other, but they took their kids, and I was friends with their kids. Right. So like when, you look really confused.
No, keep going. You're good.
I was not only was, we were friends with their kids, our parents were friends with their parents, and we were friends with their kids. And so when they would leave the church, we never saw them again. Right. So it became a very, very hard thing for us to deal with. And so like like I said, it could be one of two things. One, it could be very fruitful, and, you can have lasting friendships, or two, it can be very toxic and hurtful, because people decide to leave the church, or there's a falling out, and you just don't have those relationships anymore. And if I could say one other thing, it's weird we talked about this probably a little bit in our Preacher's Kid episode with Jordan. But we, but when you move, when you pick up and you move, you start all over again. So like those friendships start all over again, as kids and as adults. So it's kind of like the first day of school. You just don't know what to expect. And people can be nice to you up front, and there's this honeymoon phase, but after a while, like people may show their true colors, and who to trust and who not to trust, and who to give that responsibility to, and what, and and so on and so forth. So what do you think, Scott?
Yeah, so I say my situation was a bit different because when I started going back to church, and this would have been early to mid, actually been mid 90s, we started going back to church. The associate pastor at the church I was attending and the pastor's wife kind of really ministered to my parents, especially my mom, who was going through a lot of stuff. And they kind of became like almost like a second family to us. And it was one of those things where I kind of saw how here's a pastor who's good friends with not only my mom and my dad, but then also to me and my sister. And I think just having that example and that being good, and even like, there's times where I talk to, if I was having issues with my parents, as any like angst teen would, I'd talk to the pastor who is the family friend and just kind of, hey, here's this, here's that. And even to this day, still good family friends. Now they've kind of gotten the title of aunt and uncle, not only from us, but also from our kids and my niece and nephew. So I have seen where having good, strong friendships within the church has been very good, very holistic, very wonderful. On that same token, I haven't really, I can say I haven't really experienced any bad, mainly because going through seminary and going through Bible college and seminary, when this question would be brought up, usually the answer was always a resounding no. Don't have, if you're going to have best friends, do it outside the church, develop friendships outside from your congregation, because if you start, and really I think a lot of the examples were, it could show favoritism. When those friendships do kind of crumble, it becomes like a gut punch to you, and it can really take a toll on how you lead in ministry. And there's the gambit of all that. But then it's like everything that I've experienced personally, friendships were good, and friendships were one of those wonderful things that, really helped motivate a minister. Plus, there's times where I'd make friends with people outside in the community, and then they wanted to come to church. And it's like, what do you do with that when you're making friends with people who don't go to church or don't go to your church? And then because of the relationship that you built, now they start attending your church. What do? Cut the relationship now? Like I think there's a lot to really navigate. It even just, I did a quick search on Google, just see how many people are even interested in this topic. And there's a lot recently, and even just looking at, and again, I just did a Google result and just did hits. I'm not actually reading an article, but just looking at just some of the bylines. It's like Influence Magazine, the Gospel Coalition, Jesus Leadership Training, Ministry Magazine, BaptistNews.com. A lot of them are saying yes. Some say yes with limits. Some say no. So I think just kind of using that as a baseline, it is kind of a mixed bag on, can you be friends with people who are your congregants as a pastor?
Yeah, and I was thinking about this as we were, kind of, bringing up this topic. But the first church I worked at back in 20, what year was that? 2013, 2014. Um, I lived about 40 minutes away from where the church was. And so like I lived in the Franklin Middletown area, and we lived in or the church, I'm sorry, was in North Dayton. And so it was 45 minutes, on a bad day with traffic away from my house. And then the same thing with the church that I worked at last year, the larger church in Cincinnati. Um, I was 40 to 45 minutes away. However, I feel like I had two different lives going. I had like a life in the community where I lived, with my friends, with my family, and then I had my life at the churches where I served. So like, I kind of feel that way now where I work in the secular world in higher education. It's like, I drive to Oxford, Ohio, where Miami is, and I know the city of Oxford very, very well. I know people that live there. I have friends that live there, coworkers, colleagues, and it's like almost like I have two different lives. So like when I leave, um, at 5 o'clock, or leave on Friday and don't come back till Monday or Tuesday, it's like, oh, like I can turn that part of my life off. So, but I think it's also healthy to have friends and colleagues outside of the ministry, um, especially the ministry that you're serving. Scott, what do you think about that concept, and or do you think people get persecuted or given a hard time because they're not connecting with their congregants on a more deeper level?
It's I think that's a great question. I think it's twofold. I think a lot of times, like, I mean, when you think about just a basic friendship, and let's just kind of remove the church out of it, why are people friends with other people? Well, usually because, you know, you have common interests. There's things that you have in common. Maybe there's just you guys are in the same season of life. Um, like my kids, they're just kids. So every time they go see anybody new, they say, "Oh, here's my friend," and they play with them and they get along with them very well. As you get older, it's like, well, I'm usually try to be friends with people who have similar interests, that are like-minded, or maybe I could have a friend that may have a difference of opinion on certain things, but for the most part there's a lot of other things that kind of keep us connected, that even those differences isn't going to be a big strain to that relationship. um so for an example, like, one of the couple churches I interimed, or even churches that I pastored at, like, I didn't really make a lot of friends because there wasn't a lot of common interest besides like our love for Jesus. Like, you know, not a people who are over in their 60s don't really care about, video games or role playing games, or some of or rugby or things that I was interested in. And then kind of moving to Virginia, there were a couple people who we had similar interest in, and kind of built those relationships and kind of built those friendships. And even that, that kind of was didn't go too deep because there were some other things that kind of prevented those things from going deep. Usually with can't really go out and have game night with you because I'm have an infant and I got to take care of it, or you know Laura may be exhausted or tired, or she has an event that she needs to go to, so I'm on kid duty, so can't really go out and do a lot of things. So I think a lot of times when people say, well, you're not going deep enough in relationships with me, at the same time we have to kind of look at things through the other person's point of view. Maybe the pastor's not going deep into that relationship because they have small kids, or they're have a lot of, so they can't really go out and do karaoke night at 8 o'clock because they're getting their kids to bed or they're getting the kids baths. Maybe that pastor doesn't want to grow in a deep relationship because they've been burned in ministry in the past. Maybe they had a good friend and still mourning and still wounded from that relationship, so that's why they're not going deep into that relationship with you. So I think a lot of times, both on the congregation side, if you want a deep relationship with your pastor and you want to have that friendship and you want to build that friendship, a lot of times, and I hate to say it, but a lot of times you're going to have to be the one who has to take the initiative, because I think in some ways pastors are going to be they're not going to, or there may be times where pastors may have went to a seminary, went to a Bible school saying, no, 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 you can't do it. So you want to be their friend, the pastor's going to say absolutely not. And it's not because they're there to hurt your feelings. And it's not because they don't like you or they don't love you or anything else like that. It's mainly because they have this extra biblical rule that you can't do it because that's what they were taught and that's what they were told. So they don't build those friendships with people in the church. They may build a lot of relationships with other pastors or other people outside, or once the pastor leaves, then he'll build a relationship and a friendship with you after that pastor's gone, because you're no longer under his care. You're no longer under his watch or her watch.
Well, how hard is it to connect other than a surface level with people, right?
Yeah.
And to further that question, depending on the size of the church that you serve, how is it possible for you to be that close with that many people, right? And then be a good husband and a good father and a good pastor and a good leader and a good community leader and so on and so forth. Like, it's, in my opinion, a little bit unreasonable to ask those things.
And I think even when we look at the model of Jesus, Jesus had 12 disciples, he had multiple disciples, but he had kind of the close 12, and then he had the three. He had John, he had Peter, and he had James.
Mm-hmm.
Those three. And those were probably his like BFFs. And then everyone else were like BFs, and then everyone else were just, disciples or friends, but they weren't going up on the mountain with him when Jesus was having a transfiguration. Simon's not doing that. Bartholomew was not doing that. Zacchaeus, if he was still following Jesus after Jesus called him down from a tree, Zacchaeus is not going up on the mountain for the transfiguration. It's John, Peter, and James. So yeah, and I think it's hard. I think it also depends on the type of pastor too. You can have pastors who are very introverted, and
it's really hard for them.
It's very hard for them, and yet you can have people like me who are very extroverted, who thrives and energizes being around people, so want to make those friendships. And at the same time, you can even have church people have that same mentality, like, oh, well, you can't be friends with pastors, or you might see like, oh, well, pastors building all these great relationships with all these, these young families, but pastor doesn't care about us, us old timers. So, and it's not necessarily that the pastor doesn't care about the old timers in the church. Pastor does. It's just he connects with younger families because the pastor is young and he has a young family, or she has a young family, and they are just naturally connected to that because there's similar interests, there's similar struggles. It's easy to go talk to someone who's struggling through parenting than it is to go to someone who goes, well, you know what I did when my kids were teething? I just gave them a shot of Jim Beam. It's like, yeah, that's not going to fly for us. That'll be child endangerment. It'd be really bad if, oh yeah, someone at the church told me to give my kid Jim Beam. Oh yeah, moral failing. Get out of here. You're no longer a pastor. Oh goodness. But yeah, so I think it is a struggle. And I think the other side of that coin is, let's say you have a pastor who does make good connections and good relationships or good friendships within the church. And let's just say the pastor leaves due to, God just simply said, okay, your time here's done. It's time to move on. And I feel like there's also that time where once a pastor leaves a church and goes to a different church, it's almost like the people who the pastor was friends with, it's almost like, okay, well, we can't be friends with them anymore because they're no longer attending our church. I mean, I had a buddy of mine who's a worship leader and was a worship leader at this church for, I'd say probably about 10 years. It was a long time. I'm not really sure, but kind of felt the call to kind of step away. And wife was involved in children's ministry. And he kind of even told his wife, if you still feel called to do ministry here, that's fine. I'm just going to step away from leading worship because I just don't feel called to do it anymore. And I don't want to kind of hold on. And his wife kind of felt loud, I feel like God's not calling me to continue to do children's ministry here. So they left, and a lot of their people in their small group were like, oh, so I guess this is goodbye. And they're like, what do you mean? Like, we could still be friends. We could still hang out. Like, if you're having a small group at your house, we'll still come. We're just no longer here at the church. We feel God has called us to be elsewhere. But yeah, we'll still come and hang out with you guys. You guys are still our friends. Like, and so they have to really quickly kind of have to break that stigma, because I think there is a stigma that once pastor leaves, you can no longer have those relationships or that friendships anymore with them. So what are your thoughts, Micah?
Sorry, your camera, your video locked up, but your audio is kind of coming in and out. So I got part of that, but I didn't get all of it. What was the
it was just the thing about,
what was the question again?
just breaking the stigma of like when a pastor leaves, that you can still be friends with the pastor if you're a congregant, even after they leave and go to a different church, if you still have that strong, good connection with them. That doesn't seem like a question, but yeah. So
yeah, so it's
I don't know how much I was cutting in and out on your end. So
no, I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying. No, I totally get what you're saying. I mean, I think it just depends on how where you are and on what kind of terms you're leaving as a pastor. And if you leave on good terms, you can stay in touch with folks. A lot of times I find that, like, if you're going to another ministry situation or you're moving or things, it's really hard to stay in touch. But the people that will stay in touch with you are the people that want to stay in touch with you. However, if you're leaving on bad terms, you may never talk to those people again.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's kind of, and then even kind of going back to our last episode, if a pastor had to sign an NDA, and let's say you're good friends with the pastor and you have no idea what's going on and you still want to connect to the pastor, and the pastor's kind of being distant, I don't think it's necessarily the pastor doesn't want to hang out with you, but I think it's like, well, I can't hang out with you because I know that if I do, and you ask me why the pastor left or ask someone why they left, they're probably going to tell you because you have that close bond, or they're going to lie to you and they don't want to do that. So they just simply try to avoid.
Yeah. Or disconnect completely.
Exactly. It's kind of unplug and that's it. And just kind of become like Moses, just kind of become a shepherd in the lands of Midian. But Moses killed somebody, so hopefully no one's killing anybody. And that's the reason why they left the ministry. Oh goodness.
Maybe they left the ministry before they ended up doing that.
Oh.
Who knows?
Yeah. Who knows? Well, let's not think about that right now.
You brought it up.
I brought it up, and I'm taking it back. I brought it up, and I'm like, nope, we're bringing it back down.
You've got a lot of editing to do for this episode.
Oh my gosh, I'm probably not going to edit this. I'm just going to keep it going. It's authentic and raw. But yeah, so I think at the end where I kind of stand on it, yes, I think pastors should have friends in the church. I also think that there has to be boundaries.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, I think a pastor can't really, if a pastor has a meeting, an elder meeting or whatnot, and having dinner with his friends who attend the church the next day, pastor shouldn't be talking about the meeting or what happened in a meeting, even if the other people ask, oh yeah, you guys had a meeting, how was that? Like, just say, well, it's a meeting, it's just a meeting, and just kind of leave it at that, and don't really diverge or talk about it, because you want to make sure that you're living out a life of integrity, and you're living out a life of trying to do things that's best for the church and for everybody in the church. And I think at the same time, if you're a church member, you also have to kind of be mindful that, yeah, just because you're good friends with the pastor doesn't mean that you get privy to the pastor's time and the pastor's information, or even to the inside scoop of all the ins and outs that are happening at the church.
Yeah, it's boundaries are a much needed thing, and people don't always respect those, and so that can also lead to some friction within relationships in the church. And so you could be best friends with somebody, take the church out of the equation for a second, you could be best friends, you still need those boundaries, you still need that separation. You can't always be together. So yeah, healthy boundaries, healthy relationships are key to any successful ministry. Mark that down.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, great topic. I think it's something that I think a lot of people struggle with, both in the church and even pastors. So again, for those of you who are listening, do you struggle with this question? Are you a minister and you struggle with trying to dive in with building good relationships with people in the church? If you maybe you're someone who's had success and would like to share about it. Maybe you're someone who did that and it blew up in your face, and you want to share that. If you share your stories, we'll definitely, obviously with permission, we'll ask for permission. We're not just going to share your stuff, but yeah, shoot us a email, shoot us a message. We'll definitely love to hear your thoughts on this topic and all that fun stuff and jazz. And so yeah, great topic, Micah. So yeah, I think we can go ahead and wrap this up. So friends, thank you so much for joining us on the Scott Stedman podcast. Hope you have a great weekend, and we'll be back on next week with another episode. Take care.